Baba, does your hand hurt today? Marcus? Webb looked down at his daughter Sophie, who was watching him with those sharp brown eyes that never missed anything. She was 8 years old, and she'd been asking him that question every morning for the past 3 weeks, ever since the weather turned cold. No bug. It's fine. He flexed his left hand under the table, feeling the familiar resistance. The scar tissue tightened in the cold. It always did. The thick, pale ridge that ran from the base of his thumb across his wrist and disappeared under his sleeve had been part of him for 20 years now. Long enough that he sometimes forgot it was there. Long enough that he'd learned all the small adjustments, the angles that kept it hidden, the compensations that let him function. Sophie tilted her head. You always say that, because it's always true. She gave him the look, the one that said she knew she was being managed and she was deciding whether to let him get away with it. 8 years old, and already she could see through him better than anyone he'd ever known. He reached over and tugged one of her uneven braids. She'd insisted on doing her hair herself this morning, which meant one braid was significantly higher than the other, and neither of them was particularly tight. She looked like a small, disheveled professor who'd been thinking about more important things than personal grooming. Eat your cereal. We need to leave in 10 minutes. She returned to her breakfast, but he caught her glancing at his hand one more time before she did. Tuesday evening, 6:42. Marcus stood in the service corridor of Celestine with his back against the wall, flexing his left hand and watching it fail to close all the way. The cold made everything worse. The scar tissue stiffened, the damaged tendons pulled tight. The grip strength that had never fully returned after the surgeries became even less reliable. He pressed his thumb into the base of his palm, the place where it started, the ridge of old tissue that had cost him everything, and given him everything at the same time. In 18 minutes, the dinner rush would begin. 5 hours of carrying plates and pouring wine and being invisible in a room full of people who'd never been invisible in their lives. 5 hours of keeping his left hand angled away so no one looked too closely. This morning, Sophie had asked about his hand. He'd told her it was fine. He told her that every morning. She was 8 years old, and she noticed everything, and the last thing she needed was another thing to carry. She already carried enough. They both did. Celestine was the kind of restaurant where the lighting was designed to keep secrets, and the menu had no prices. The kind of place where Marcus Webb in another life might have eaten. But in this life, he folded napkins and memorized wine pairings and worked doubles when Greg asked. Because doubles meant Sophie could stay in her after-school program through February. The after-school program cost $400 a month. His rent was $1,800. Sophie needed new shoes. Her current pair had a split at the right toe that he'd been patching with electrical tape for 2 weeks. He could afford the shoes or the after-school program extension, not both. Not this month. He did the math constantly. The math of barely enough. The calculations that ran in the background of his mind like software he couldn't turn off. He checked the reservation screen on the wall. Table 12. Cole. Single guest. Note indicated she'd requested window seating specifically. He didn't think about the name. Cole was common. There was no reason to think about it. At 7:03, she walked in. Marcus saw her from across the room before she reached his section. Dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested efficiency rather than vanity. Gray coat that probably cost more than his monthly rent. She moved through the restaurant with the particular confidence of someone who'd stopped asking permission for things a long time ago. She settled at table 12, facing the window as requested. She ordered water and didn't look at her phone. She watched the snow falling outside with an expression that was hard to read. Marcus picked up the breadbasket and crossed to her table. Good evening. Will you be ordering from the tasting menu this evening, or would you prefer to choose individually? His voice was quiet, not timid, just careful with itself. Words cost something. He'd learned that young. Individually, she said. He nodded and set the menu at the edge of the table. Most servers made a small performance of it, a flourish, a comment about the chef's recommendations. He didn't. He'd learned that people like this preferred efficiency over warmth. He moved to check on the adjacent table, refilled a water glass, cleared an empty bread plate, the small mechanics of the job that required his body but not his mind. He was pouring water at table 10 when he felt it, the quality of attention that meant someone was watching him. Not casually the way diners sometimes watch servers with really seeing them. This was different. This was focused. He glanced back toward table 12. The woman was looking at his hands. Specifically, she was looking at his left hand, the one holding the water pitcher at an angle that kept his palm turned slightly away. The angle had become so automatic he barely noticed himself doing it anymore. Their eyes met for half a second. He looked away first. But something cold had moved through his chest, something that felt like recognition, though he couldn't have said of what. He worked his section for 40 minutes, took orders, delivered plates, maintained the careful professionalism that Greg had praised in his last review. 3 separate times he caught her watching him with that same focused attention. He didn't let himself think about why. At the end of the meal, she asked for the check. Marcus brought it, set it at the edge of the table, and then she spoke. Your hand, that scar, it goes from your thumb across your wrist. He went still. Kitchen accident, years ago. She shook her head slowly. No, it wasn't. He didn't answer. He stood there with the check in its leather folder and waited for whatever was coming. Because something was coming. He could feel it the way you feel weather changing before you see the clouds. January 29th, 2005. State Route 12, outside Allendale. There was a car on its side below the guardrail. A family of 3 trapped inside. Father unconscious, mother pinned, a 16-year-old girl in the back seat. The restaurant noise faded. Everything seemed very far away except this woman's voice and the steady certainty in it. A man appeared at the broken window. He cut through the girl's seatbelt. He pulled her out into the snow. Then he went back in for her mother. Then he went back in again for her father. She paused. He went back in twice. Marcus's hand tightened on the check folder. By the time the paramedics arrived, he was gone. There was blood in the snow where he'd been standing. The girl gave a statement. The report said, unknown male, approximate age 25 to 30. Dark hair. She looked at him. Her eyes weren't curious. They were certain. I was that girl. I was 16 years old. And you saved my life. The moment stretched. Marcus could feel his pulse in his wrist, in the scar tissue, in the place where everything had changed 20 years ago on a frozen road in the dark. You have the wrong person, he said. I don't think I do. Then I'm sorry to disappoint you. He set the check down and walked away. His hands were steady. He'd learned a long time ago how to keep his hands steady when the rest of him wasn't. He went to the service corridor, stood with his back against the wall, pressed his thumb into the base of his palm until the pressure became a different kind of pain. 20 years. He'd been 24 years old, 6 months out of the army, living in a room he rented by the week while he figured out what came next. He'd been driving home from visiting his mother in Allendale. The roads were iced, the night was clear and cold and empty, and then there was a sound, the particular sound of metal meeting the world. He'd pulled over, gone down the embankment, and there was a car on its side with gasoline leaking onto the snow. He hadn't thought about it. Thinking would have slowed him down. He'd just moved. The way he'd learned to move in places where hesitation got people killed. There was a girl in the back seat, 16 maybe. Dark hair. Eyes that were too calm for what was happening. The kind of calm that meant shock. Or the kind of calm that meant something else. Something steadier. He'd cut through her seatbelt with the knife he always carried. Pulled her out through the broken window. Set her in the snow and told her to stay. Then he went back. The mother was conscious, trapped by the crumpled door. He worked her free, carried her up the embankment, set her next to her daughter. Then he went back again. The father was unconscious, bleeding from the head, heavy. Marcus had dragged him through the window and up the embankment while his left hand screamed at him. He'd sliced it open on the broken glass. He hadn't noticed until later. The adrenaline had been too thick. The need had been too immediate. By the time the paramedics arrived, he was sitting in his car at the side of the road with his hand wrapped in his shirt, waiting to make sure the family got loaded into the ambulances. He didn't give his name. He didn't stay for the questions. He drove himself to the hospital, got 19 stitches, went home. That was supposed to be the end of it. But it wasn't. 2 years later, the hand started causing problems. The tendon damage that no one had caught at the time. The nerve compression that got worse when he used it for the gripping and pulling that his job required. He'd been a search and rescue volunteer by then. The work had felt like a continuation of something, a way to make the instinct useful. He'd been good at it. He'd been very good at it. until the winter extraction in 2011. A hiker trapped in a ravine. Marcus went down. The rescue succeeded, but his hand did not. Deep tissue damage, severed tendons, 3 surgeries, partial permanent loss of grip strength. His career ended at 30. He didn't think about what that cost him. Thinking about costs meant thinking about ledgers. Ledgers meant thinking about what he'd lost. He had Sophie now. He had a life that worked. Barely. But it worked, and the last thing he needed was someone from 20 years ago walking into his restaurant and telling him she knew what he was. He finished his shift. He took his tips, which were decent. He said goodnight to Greg and walked out into the snow. The woman was gone. Her table had been reset for the next service. He told himself it was over. Marcus got home at 11:47. The apartment was dark, except for the small nightlight Sophie insisted on in the hallway. He took off his coat, hung it on the hook by the door, untied his shoes and set them neatly on the mat. The small rituals of a man who lived alone with a child and had learned that order was the cheapest form of control. The apartment was narrow, 2 bedrooms barely, but he'd done things with it. Bookshelves on every wall, real books, not decorative ones. A second-hand couch with a blanket folded over one arm. On the kitchen counter, a coffee maker and a small cactus that had survived 3 years without much effort on anyone's part. The window faced a brick wall. No direct sunlight ever, but Sophie had solved this by taping drawings everywhere. Horses, rockets, self-portraits. Color was the first thing you saw when you walked in. He checked on her before anything else. She was asleep with her hair fanned out across the pillow and one arm hanging off the edge of the bed. She always slept like that. Every night he lifted the arm and tucked it back under the blanket. Every night she stirred but didn't wake. 8 years old. Every morning she woke up ready to argue about something. Every night she fell asleep mid-sentence if you let her. She was the most specific person he'd ever known. He went to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, drank it standing at the sink while he looked out the window at the snow still coming down. He'd noticed the woman at table 12. He noticed everyone at his tables. It was the job. But he'd noticed her the way you noticed a particular quality of light. Not because it was intrusive, because it was different. She watched things carefully, watched him carefully. And when their eyes had met, there'd been something in her expression that wasn't curiosity exactly. It was recognition. He'd seen that look before. Twice. Both times he'd handled it the same way he handled everything he didn't want to deal with. He went quiet and kept moving and waited for it to pass. He was good at waiting for things to pass. The next morning he made Sophie breakfast. Cereal because they were out of eggs. Toast because she complained about cereal being boring. She sat at the table with her hair needing brushing and her backpack already on because she'd read somewhere that students who were prepared learned better. And Sophie took preparation very seriously. Her braids from yesterday had unraveled into something that looked like a small explosion. "I can fix those," Marcus said. "I'm going to do them myself. You did them yourself yesterday." She gave him a look that suggested this wasn't relevant information. He poured her juice, sat down across from her, watched her eat her boring cereal with the serious concentration she brought to everything. "Dad," she said, without looking up. "Yeah, Bug, your hand looks worse today." He glanced at it automatically. The scar was more visible than usual. The cold made it tighter, paler. "It's fine." She looked up then, brown eyes that missed nothing. "You always say that, because it's always fine. Mrs. Delgado says when people always say the same thing, it's because they want you to stop asking. Mrs. Delgado is very wise. She also says you work too much. Mrs. Delgado has a lot of opinions." Sophie considered this. Then she returned to her cereal with the air of someone who'd made her point and was willing to let it rest. For now. He walked her to school. At the door, she turned and looked at him with that expression that always made him feel like she was the adult and he was the child. "Love you, Baba." "Love you too, Bug." She walked inside. He watched until the door closed behind her. Then he stood there for another moment, the way he always did, just in case. That afternoon, he sat at the kitchen table with the bills spread out in front of him. Rent, $1,800, due in 12 days. Electric, $83. Phone, $47. After-school program extension, $400. Sophie's shoes, the ones with the split at the toe that he'd been patching with electrical tape. $40 minimum if he went to the discount place. $60 if he wanted something that would last more than 3 months. He had $812 in his checking account. His next paycheck would be $400 and something depending on tips. He did the math. The math he did every month. The constant calculation of what he could afford and what he could not. The shoes or the after-school program. Not both. The after-school program meant Sophie had somewhere safe to be until 6 when he worked day shifts. It meant she wasn't alone in the apartment. It meant she had help with homework and friends to play with and adults who watched out for her. The shoes meant her feet wouldn't be cold and wet when it snowed. He rubbed the scar on his palm. The small ritual of acknowledgement. This is what it is. This is what it costs. He made a decision. He would do extra shifts. Greg had asked twice this week if he could cover for people who called out. He'd said no both times because of Sophie. He would say yes. He would figure out the childcare somehow. Mrs. Delgado would help. She always did. He put the bills in a stack and put the stack in the drawer where he kept the things he didn't want to look at. Then he went to take a shower before his shift. 11 days later, she came back. Marcus saw her name on the reservation screen and felt something cold settle in his chest. Table 12. Cole. Single guest. 7 p.m. He asked Greg if he could switch sections. Greg looked at him with the expression of a manager who had been asked unreasonable things by employees before and wasn't impressed. We're short-staffed, Webb. You're the best I have on the floor tonight. Table 12 is yours. Marcus didn't argue. He'd learned a long time ago when arguments were worth having and when they weren't. He worked her table, brought the bread, took her order, maintained the professional distance that the job required. She didn't mention the accident. She didn't mention the scar. She ate her meal slowly, watched the snow through the window. At the end of the night, she left a card under the bread basket. He found it when he cleared the table. 4 words, written in precise handwriting. Thank you for what you did. He put the card in his pocket. He should have thrown it away. He didn't. She came back again. A week later. This time she left another note. I never forgot. He put it in his pocket with the first one. She came back a third time. The note said, I've been looking for you for 20 years. And a fourth time. This time she didn't leave a note. She waited until the restaurant was nearly empty. Then she stood up and walked to where he was resetting a table in the corner. My name is Vivian Cole. I run a private equity firm. I've spent 20 years wondering what happened to the man who saved my family. Marcus set down the napkin he was folding. There's nothing to have a conversation about. You lost your career, she said, because of what you did that night. The hand injury, the surgeries, the search and rescue work you couldn't do anymore. She paused. I know all of it. He looked at her steadily. You had someone investigate me. I had someone find out what I needed to know. Because I want to help, and I can't help if I don't understand what help looks like. Marcus's jaw tightened. I don't need help. Everyone needs help sometimes. I have a daughter, a job, an apartment that's good enough. That's what I've built. And I don't need someone showing up 20 years later trying to turn my life into a debt she thinks she owes. Is that what you think I'm doing? I didn't save your family so that someday you could feel sorry for me. The words came out harder than he intended, but he didn't take them back. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. I don't feel sorry for you, she said. I feel grateful, and I've spent 20 years not being able to say that to anyone. She picked up her coat. I'm not going to force anything, but if you ever change your mind, if you ever need something, anything, you know where to find me. She left. Marcus finished resetting the table. His hands were steady. They were always steady, but something in his chest was not. 3 weeks passed. Marcus told himself it was over. The woman had said her piece. She'd made her offer. He'd declined. That was the end of it. Except it wasn't. The letter arrived on a Tuesday from the building management company, informing him that the building had been purchased by a new investment group and that all existing lease agreements would be honored at current rates locked in for 3 years. He read it twice. Then he set it down and stood in the kitchen for a long time. The second letter arrived a week later from Whitfield Academy, informing him that Sophie had been selected for their merit-based scholarship program beginning in September. Full tuition and materials covered. The letter cited an anonymous nomination from a community member. He read it 3 times. Then he folded it and put it in the drawer with the bills and sat on the couch and didn't move for 15 minutes. Sophie found him there when she got home from school. "Baba, what's wrong?" "Nothing," he said. "Come here." She climbed up next to him, showed him a drawing she'd made. A wolf, she said, though it looked more like a rectangle with legs. He told her it was a very good wolf. "Is something good happening?" she asked. "Maybe." She tilted her head. "That thing she did when she was thinking. Is it because of the pretty lady?" He looked down at her. "What pretty lady?" Sophie shrugged with the elaborate casualness of an 8-year-old who knew she'd said something interesting. "Mrs. Chen at school said someone asked about my class. A lady with dark hair. She said she was thinking about enrolling her niece." Marcus went very still. "Did she?" he said. His voice was quiet, flat, the voice he used when he was working very hard to keep his voice even. Sophie looked at him. She noticed. She always noticed. "Is that bad, no bug?" "It's fine." He stood up. "Stay here. I need to make a phone call." He called in sick the next day. First time in 14 months. He drove to the address listed for Cole Capital Group on the publicly available business registration. He sat in the parking garage for 20 minutes. Then he got out and went inside. Vivian's office was on the 14th floor. It wasn't what he expected. He'd expected glass and steel and the aggressive minimalism of serious money. Instead, there were books everywhere. Real books, stacked and annotated. A large desk that faced away from the view. 2 chairs by the window that looked actually sat in. Vivian was standing when he walked in. Gray suit, hair pulled back, her expression entirely composed, which told him she'd expected this. "You asked about my daughter's class," he said. "I asked about a school. I didn't mention your daughter." "Don't." His voice was still quiet. But there was something in it now that hadn't been there in the restaurant. "I told you no. I was clear. You were. And I respected that. You enrolled my daughter in a private school. She was nominated for a scholarship, based on her academic record, which is apparently quite strong. Vivian." He used her name for the first time. "Stop." She stopped. "I understand what you're trying to do," he said, "and I'm telling you for the second time that I don't want it. Not the school, not the apartment, not whatever comes next." He looked at her evenly. "I know you think you owe me something, but you don't get to decide what that looks like for me and my daughter. She deserves a good education, and I'll provide that. On a server's salary, it'll take longer, it'll be harder. That's my problem to solve." His voice was quiet but certain. "I'm not asking you to understand it. I'm asking you to stop." Vivian held his gaze for a long moment. "Sophie's scholarship has already been processed," she said. "Whitfield doesn't undo those. The building situation is done. The new owner bought the whole building. It has nothing specifically to do with you." She paused. "But I hear you, and I'll stop." He looked at her. "The restaurant job," he said. "I'll take another section if you're going to keep coming in. I won't come in anymore." "Thank you." He turned to go. "Marcus," she said it quietly. He stopped, but he didn't turn around. "I'm not trying to make you into something you didn't ask to be. I just..." She paused. "I know what that night cost you. I'm sorry it cost you anything." A long silence. He walked out without answering. That night, after Sophie was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He didn't drink. The Whitfield letter was in front of him, still folded. He sat there for a long time. 3 weeks passed. The weather got colder. Sophie's cough got worse. Marcus picked up extra shifts when Greg offered them and put money aside for the shoes she needed and told himself he was managing. He was always managing. The card Vivian had left was still in his pocket. He hadn't thrown it away. He told himself he didn't know why. Tuesday night, 11:47. The phone rang. Marcus was asleep, which he rarely was by that hour, but he'd worked a double and his body had simply shut down when he got home. The phone woke him. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "This is the overnight desk at Children's Memorial Hospital. Is this Marcus Webb?" He was out of bed before the voice finished saying his name. "Your daughter, Sophia, was brought in by ambulance approximately 90 minutes ago. She was found unresponsive by a neighbor. She's stable now, but we need you to come in as quickly as possible." The drive took 12 minutes. He made it in 9. Sophie was in a room on the 3rd floor, pale against the pillow, smaller than she should have been, an IV in her arm, and a monitor beeping steadily beside her bed. The attending physician was a woman named Dr. Reardon. She explained it in calm professional language. Bacterial pneumonia, aggressive, fast-moving, caught in time. In time meant within a window of hours. If Mrs. Delgado, the neighbor who checked on Sophie when Marcus worked late, hadn't gone to look in on her at midnight. Marcus sat down in the chair beside the bed. He took Sophie's hand. Her fingers were thin and hot from the fever. Baba, her eyes were open. Barely. Glazed with exhaustion and whatever they'd given her for the fever. "I'm here," he said. "Am I okay?" He squeezed her hand gently. "You're going to be okay." She closed her eyes again. Her hand stayed in his. Marcus sat there for a long time. The monitor beeped. The rain made soft sounds against the window. Outside, the sky began to shift from black to gray. At 4 a.m, he stepped into the hallway to make calls. His mother in Ohio, 71 and not well. He put the phone down before it rang. Greg at the restaurant. Voicemail. He left a message. Said he needed time. Said he was sorry. He went back to Sophie's room and sat down and looked at the numbers on the monitor and tried not to think about the numbers in his checking account. $847. The rent was due in 8 days. The hospital would want a copay. The antibiotics were IV and strong and would require follow-up. Insurance covered most of it. Not all of it. Never all of it. He was good at this. He'd been doing this for years. The math of barely enough. But Sophie was 8 years old and burning with fever, and the math wasn't adding up. He sat there, holding her hand, watching the monitor, and for the first time in a very long time, he didn't know what to do. 5:30 a.m. Soft knock on the door. Marcus turned around. Vivian Cole was standing in the doorway. Dark coat, hair loose. She looked like she hadn't planned to be awake either. She looked at him, then at Sophie, then back at him. Her expression wasn't pitying, wasn't performative, just present. "Mrs. Delgado is my building manager's aunt," Vivian said quietly. "She called me when she couldn't reach you." Marcus didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Vivian stepped into the room. She moved carefully the way you move in a hospital room, as if the air itself required respect. "There's a specialist I know," she said. "Dr. Harrison, head of pediatric infectious disease at this hospital. He's one of the best in the country." She paused. "I can have him here in 30 minutes, if you want." Marcus looked at Sophie. The monitor beeped. The rain made soft sounds against the window. He thought about all the things he'd said. The careful speeches about dignity and independence and building a life that didn't require anyone's charity. He thought about $847 in a checking account and a daughter whose hand was small and hot in his. "Call him," he said. Dr. Harrison arrived at 6:10 in the morning. He was a man in his 60s who walked with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd seen worse than this and knew how to fix it. He reviewed Sophie's chart, adjusted the antibiotic protocol, ordered an additional diagnostic test that the regular attending hadn't considered. He spoke to Marcus directly, eye to eye, treating him like a colleague rather than a parent in crisis. "She's going to be fine," he said, "but I want to keep her here for observation. 4 days. After he left, the room was quieter. Vivian was still there. She'd brought 2 coffees from somewhere. The hospital cafeteria, probably. She'd set one near Marcus without comment. He picked it up. It was weak and stale, and it was the best thing he'd tasted in hours. "How long has it been," Vivian asked, "since someone sat with you through something?" He thought about the question honestly. "A while," he said. She nodded once. No comment, just acknowledgement. They sat in silence for a long time. The monitor beeped. The light outside shifted from gray to pale gold. Sophie woke up around 8 in the morning. Her eyes were clearer than they'd been. She looked at Marcus, then at Vivian, then at the IV in her arm. "Baba," she said, "I don't like this. I know," he said, "but it's making you better." Sophie considered this with the serious expression she used for all important information. Then she looked at Vivian. "Who's that?" Marcus hesitated. "This is Vivian. She's someone I helped a long time ago, and now she's helping me." Sophie's eyes narrowed, the particular expression of an 8-year-old who knew she was being managed. "What did you do?" "It's a long story. You always say that when you don't want to tell me something." Marcus almost smiled. It was the first time he'd almost smiled in hours. "I pulled her out of a car," he said. when she was not much older than you. Sophie looked at Vivian with new interest. He saved you. He saved my whole family, Vivian said. My mom and dad, too. Sophie absorbed this. Then she looked at Marcus's left hand, the one that was resting on the bed beside her. Is that how your hand got hurt? Silence. Part of it, he said. Yes. Does it still hurt? Sometimes, when it's cold. Sophie nodded slowly. She'd known about the hand for years. She'd grown up watching him compensate for it, watching him angle it away, watching him do the small, unconscious things that people do when part of their body no longer works the way it should. But she'd never asked directly, and he'd never told her. She looked at Vivian with sudden intensity. You should help him more. The words came out with the particular directness of a child who'd decided that honesty was more important than diplomacy. He doesn't let people help him. He says he's fine when he's not fine, and he works too much, and he pretends he doesn't need things when he does. Sophie, Marcus said. It's true. Mrs. Delgado says you're the most stubborn person she's ever met. She says it nice, but she means it. Vivian made a sound that was almost a laugh. She sounds like a smart woman. She is, Sophie said. She makes good soup. The moment held. Something in the room had shifted. Something that had been tight and guarded had loosened. Sophie looked at Vivian again. Are you going to stay? The question hung in the air. It was for Marcus as much as for Vivian. If that's okay, Vivian said. I'd like to. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded. That's okay, he said. Sophie was discharged on the 4th day. She came home in Vivian's car because Marcus's car had a broken heater and it was still cold outside. Sophie sat in the back seat and looked out the window and asked if she could pick what they listened to on the radio. Vivian said yes. Marcus said nothing. He was watching his daughter in the mirror, the color back in her cheeks, the brightness back in her eyes. She was going to be fine. Dr. Harrison had said so. The antibiotics had worked. The fever was gone. But something else had changed. Marcus could feel it, the careful walls he'd built, the independence he'd maintained for 5 years, the insistence that he didn't need anyone and never would. Something in those walls had cracked. They got Sophie settled on the couch with a blanket and a cup of soup and an animated film about a dog who could talk. Then Marcus and Vivian stood in the kitchen on opposite sides of the counter, speaking quietly. Thank you, Marcus said. It came out simply. None of the resistance that had marked their previous conversations. You don't have to, Vivian said. I know I don't. I'm saying it because it's true. She nodded. The night of the accident, she said. I've thought about it for 20 years. What would have happened if you hadn't been on that road? What would have happened if you'd driven past? Marcus was quiet. I was in shock, Vivian said. When you pulled me out of the car, I don't think I said anything. I just sat in the snow and watched you go back in. Twice. She looked at him. I wasn't afraid. She said, the car was on fire and my father was unconscious and I should have been terrified. But I wasn't, because you moved like you already knew how it was going to end. Marcus remembered that night. The cold, the smell of gasoline. The girl sitting in the snow with her arms around her knees. I didn't know, he said. I never know. I just do what has to be done and hope it's enough. It was enough, Vivian said. It was more than enough. He paused. I was 24, he said. 6 months out of the army. I wasn't doing well. It was a bad winter. For other reasons. He looked at the coffee maker. I was driving back from visiting my mother when I heard the crash. I went down the embankment. There was a car on its side. Gasoline everywhere. A girl in the back seat. He paused. She was very calm. Given everything. I thought about that a lot afterward. I wasn't calm, Vivian said. I was terrified. I just didn't have a way to show it. He looked at her. When you showed up at the restaurant the first time, he said, I knew. Not immediately, but by the end of the service. Why did you pretend you didn't? Because I'd spent 20 years making it not matter. If it didn't matter, then everything that came after didn't have to mean anything either. The hand, the career, all of it. He poured water into the coffee maker. But it mattered. Of course it mattered. I just wasn't ready to let someone come in and rearrange the story I'd made up about it. Is that what I did? You showed up with 20 years of it on your face. And I'd spent 20 years putting mine somewhere I couldn't see it. He paused. That's what made it hard. Not the offer of help. In the living room, Sophie said loudly, Baba. The dog is doing something weird. You have to see this. Marcus looked toward the doorway. then back at Vivian. Something passed between them. Not romantic, not yet, maybe not ever, but something. An acknowledgement, a recognition. You should probably see what the dog is doing, Vivian said. The corner of her mouth had moved, just slightly. 3 months passed. The spring came slowly. Cold rain giving way to warmer rain, giving way to pale sunlight that felt like a promise. Marcus didn't see Vivian every day. They were both busy. He had his job, his shifts, his constant calculations. She had her company, her meetings, the life she'd built. But she came by. Saturdays sometimes. A weeknight here and there. She brought food that was too expensive and books for Sophie that were just right. She sat on the second-hand couch and listened to Sophie explain things and didn't try to be anything other than present. Sophie had started calling her V. Then the V. Marcus didn't understand the linguistic evolution, but he'd stopped trying to. One evening in late May, Sophie was asleep, and Marcus and Vivian were sitting on the couch with cups of coffee that had gone cold. "There's a job," Vivian said. "Not for me, not arranged by me." Marcus looked at her. "Ray Nakamura, operations manager at a logistics company. He's been a regular at Celestine for years. He's watched you work. He wants to offer you a position." She paused. "Managing ground operations for the Northeast Corridor. Salary is 3 times what you make at the restaurant." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "How long have you known about this? 2 weeks. I wasn't sure if I should tell you. I thought you'd think I arranged it. Did you number Ray noticed you on his own? Mentioned it to me because he knows we know each other now. I told him the decision was entirely yours." Marcus sat with that. "I'd need to give Greg proper notice," he said. "Of course. And make sure the hours work with Sophie's schedule. Ray knows you have a daughter. He's flexible." Marcus nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said, "for telling me. You're welcome. For telling you." He took the job. He started in August. The work was different from anything he'd done before, but not harder. Logistics required the same skills that serving tables required: attention to detail, problem solving under pressure. Seeing what was broken and fixing it. He was good at it. He'd always been good at fixing things. In September, Sophie started at Whitfield Academy. Merit scholarship. Full tuition and materials. First day of school. Sophie wore a new backpack. Dark green, her choice. Her hair was in 2 uneven braids she'd insisted on doing herself. Marcus walked her to the door of the building. Crouched down. Straightened her collar. She submitted to this for approximately 3 seconds. "I know, Dad." She walked inside with the confidence of someone who'd decided not to be nervous. Marcus stood on the sidewalk for a moment after the door closed. His phone buzzed. "Vivian." "How did she do?" he typed back. 3 seconds. Then she walked in like she owned the place. A pause. Of course she did. He put the phone away. Walked to the subway. Things had changed. Not dramatically. Not in the ways Vivian had originally tried to arrange, but in the quieter ways that come from 2 people deciding to stop being strangers. Late September. Saturday afternoon. A park near the river. Sophie was running ahead, visible by the green backpack she wore even on weekends, because she liked it. Marcus and Vivian walked side by side. Their shoulders were close, but not touching. "Do you ever think about it?" Vivian said. "What would have happened if you'd taken a different road that night?" Marcus watched Sophie discover a stick approximately her own height. She began examining it with the focus of a scientist who'd found something of immense significance. "I think about it sometimes," he said. "Less than I used to. Less because of time. Less because of the things that came from that road." He paused. Looked at Sophie. "Most of them are here." "Oh." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "That's a generous way to look at it," she said. "Given what the road also took. People don't get to know which version of their life is the real one," Marcus said. "So I try not to do that math." Ahead of them, Sophie turned around. The stick was held horizontally in her hands like a staff. "Baba," she called. "This is the biggest stick I have ever seen in my life." "It's very impressive," Marcus said. "Can we keep it? Where would we put it?" "In the living room," she said, as if this were obvious. Vivian said quietly so only Marcus could hear. "She's not wrong that it would fit." The corner of her mouth was doing the thing it did when she was trying not to smile. "Don't encourage the stick," he said. "I'm not encouraging anything. I'm just present." The word hung in the air. Present. The word she'd used months ago. In the hospital. In the apartment. in all the moments when she'd offered nothing except the simple fact of being there. Sophie had lost interest in the stick negotiation. She was crouching by the water's edge, now studying something with intense focus. The light through the trees was warm and long, late afternoon and early fall, the kind of light that made everything look golden and deliberate. Marcus reached over. His hand found hers, not dramatically, not announced, just a hand, finding a hand the way hands do when they've been moving toward each other for a long time without rushing. His left hand, the one with the scar. She felt the ridge of old tissue against her palm, the place where everything had changed 20 years ago on a frozen road in the dark. She didn't say anything about it. She just held it. Sophie stood up from the water's edge, turned around, looked at them with the specific expression of an 8-year-old who'd noticed something and decided it was acceptable. "Okay," she said, apparently to no one in particular. Then she went back to looking at the water. Marcus thought about 20 years. A car on its side in the snow, a girl with calm eyes in the back seat, the choice to go back in, and then to go back in again. All the things that choice had cost him, and all the things it had given him, his daughter ahead of him, this woman beside him, this life built piece by piece from the wreckage of other lives. He thought about what Sophie had said in the hospital. You don't let people help you. You pretend you don't need things when you do. She was right. She was usually right. His thumb moved slightly against the back of Vivian's hand. The scar tissue, the healed wrong place, the proof of what he'd been willing to do for people he didn't know. Vivian looked at him, and there it was, the same calm he'd seen in her face 20 years ago, when she was 16 years old, sitting in the snow, watching him work. She wasn't afraid then. She wasn't afraid now. The river moved, the light held. Somewhere behind them, the city kept doing what cities do, all that noise and motion and forward pressure, but here by the water it was quiet. Sophie called from the edge, "Baba, there's a frog, an actual frog." "Don't touch it," Marcus said automatically. "I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to observe it." "There's a difference," Vivian laughed. "The real one, not the professional version." Marcus looked at her, at his daughter, at the light coming through the trees. Some people carry their worth in titles and credentials and the rooms they're allowed to enter. Others carry it in the scars they earned, doing what needed to be done. In the children, they raised alone. In the quiet moments when someone finally says yes to being helped. The world doesn't always know the difference. But Sophie knew, and Vivian knew, and that Marcus had decided was enough. That was everything.